Got to put my props back. I'm a very serious risk player, and got to have my props back on the board. Seth, Sam, y'all ever pulled anybody over who, that's the reason they gave you for the inebriated driving, that they was inebriated by Jesus? Either one of you? You have? You've had somebody do that? I was going to say if they hadn't, I was going to try that next time I got pulled over. There will be a next time, I guarantee it. I don't ever complain, though. Every time I've ever been pulled over and they looked at you know why I pulled you? Yes, sir, I was speeding. I ain't going to make an excuse for it. You want to write me a ticket, that's fine. If you don't want to, you give me a warning, that's fine. But I'm not going to lie. I know I was speeding. If you're honest with them like that, sometimes they'll, one time they gave me a warning. One time. Sometimes, no, one time. One time I got a warning. Before I get started today, I want to make a point. Today's message is going to revolve around me to a certain extent. That's what a testimony does. But I'm not here to tell you about how wonderful I am or how horrible I am or the good things or the bad things I've done. The reason I'm sharing it with you is because it's a part of who I am. It's a part of my life. But as I told the kids, the one thing I want to share with you is the fact that from point to point, from birth to now, I have seen Jesus woven in and out of my life. And that's who ultimately this testimony is about. As Paul said to Timothy, it's not a testimony about me. It's a testimony to my gospel, my story of Jesus. So I want to also say one more thing. After the service is over with, I've had a bit of a sore throat. After the service is over with, if you want to come up and look at some of the stuff, I will ask that you don't touch. And there's a reason, and most of it's probably fine, but there are a few things up here that are very valuable to me, very old, some of them, to the point that I've got a Bible up here that's tattered and the cover's about to come off of it. Another one, this big picture up here that Tiffany's going to help me show you in a little bit is if somebody accidentally puts their foot through it, they don't have to worry about answering to me, they've got to answer to her. So, pity on my prayers for you if that was to happen. So, I want to begin today, and I hope I don't cause a squall by coming out here too far. I want to begin today with three of the pictures up here. You can't tell people who you are if you don't talk about your family, whether it's good or bad. I know some of you here today could probably care less to tell people about your family because you're strained or you've had heartache or pain or suffering or like that. I've had my share of that. But for the most part, I've been blessed with the family I have. This picture right here was given to me by my Aunt Myrtle, my daddy's sister, given to me years after my parents' divorce, but she said, she told me, she says, I think it's important, in spite of the fact that your mom and dad are divorced, to let people know where you come from, to let people know about your childhood, and I wanted to give you some pictures that I found hanging out somewhere. The one up here at the top is a picture of my mom and daddy in 1977. If you don't know that for a fact, you come up here and take a look at my daddy's tux and my daddy's hairstyle, you will know that it's the 70s. He has the lamb chops coming down to about here where they stop, and ooh, that hair and that tux, it's right out of 1970 something. But as a picture of my mom and daddy on their wedding day. The one over here on this side is a picture of me and my brother with my daddy on the day of his wedding to my stepmother. Down here at the bottom is a picture of us as a family at a family reunion. I believe that's 1991, I believe. And then this is my granny and my Papa Giles. One of the most painful experiences of my life when my grandmother Giles passed away, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. My Papa Giles would be 105 this September, I believe, 106 maybe, if he was still alive. My grandmother would not be too far behind. I think she'd been 100 this past March. She'd have been 100. This is my mother and my brother. I was in college when this picture was taken, which explains why I'm not included in it. My mother, my brother, and my stepfather. Many of you have heard the story of right before. In fact, Marvin and them had informed me I was the choice that they were going to bring to the church, and that we were setting up the date that I was supposed to come up here and speak the first time, and Tiffany lost her uncle, and we buried him on a Sunday, and the following Monday morning I got the call that my stepfather had a massive heart attack and passed away, and which kind of delayed our opportunity to come up here. This one right here in the middle, this is my mother's parents. And you've heard me talk about Papa and Big Mama. And Big Mama's not called Big Mama because of her size. Big Mama's called Big Mama because that's what she called her grandma, who was a very small woman. Big Mama just happened to be big on top of the fact that she was Big Mama. Big Mama's doing much better now. For those of you who were asking yesterday, her health's doing better. But they play such a huge part in the story of who I am. The second thing I want to share with you, this is let me get the year real quick. Christmas out of 87. I would have been 5, I believe. At 5 years old, my grandmother already knew I was going to be a preacher. This is the first Bible I ever received that I can remember. I may have had one of those itty-bitty little baby Bibles, but if it did, I don't know where it is. This is the first Bible I ever received that I remember receiving. It was given to me by my grandmother, my Big Mama, and my Papa. When I was 3 years old, 4 years old, one of the ladies who I don't have a picture up here because I couldn't find, I've got a little picture of her somewhere and I don't know where it's at, is my Nana, which is my great aunt, my Big Mama's aunt. She was instrumental in raising me the first few years of my life. Mama worked, Daddy worked, Big Mama worked, Papa worked. Edna and my great-grandmother refused to be called Grandma. She was one of those people, and when she first became a grandma, I'm too young to be a grandma, so she had her grandkids call her Edna, which was her name. Well, by the time great-grandkids rolled around, it was too late to break the habit, so my Edna, and I didn't realize Edna was actually a woman's name until much later. I thought it was just a little nickname that you gave great-grandmothers. That was my Edna. I didn't know that was her actual name. But Nana and Edna, they were sisters, and they lived in the basement apartment of my grandparents' house. And they'd take me to church. Mom and Daddy are believers, but most of my early childhood, even into adolescence, they didn't go to church regularly. Big Mom and Papa, Nana and Edna took me to church, Midway Baptist in Gretna. And I would come home, and they had this very low but long coffee table and the big family Bible. You know what I'm talking about, them great big. This one was black, and it actually belonged to my great-great-great-granddaddy at some point. I'm going to fight to inherit that at some point because I collect the family Bibles now, which you'll see in a little bit. But it would sit up at the end of the coffee table, and they'd have it open somewhere, and I'd come up, and she said I couldn't read, couldn't write, could scribble. More than one occasion, they had to grab me right before I scribbled in the family Bible. But they said I'd get at the end of it, and I'd flip pages around or something like that, and I would start to preach, and basically I regurgitated the pastor's sermon from the Sunday prior to that. And my grandmother said at 3 years old that she was astonished at how much I could remember from what the preacher said. Most of you in here, my daughter's getting ready to turn 3, and if I looked at her and say, what did Daddy speak on last Sunday? She's going to give me this blank stare, and Daddy talk? Yeah, Daddy talk. What did he talk on? Daddy talk. Okay. But I was able to tell you, I'd get up and I'd look at Nana. They had a piano down there. It was my Nana's piano. And I'd look at her and say, all right, you're going to be Ann Stevens. She was the organist at the church. You're going to be Ann Stevens, and you're going to go and you're going to, Ann Simpson, you're going to go and you're going to play the piano. And she'd go over there and she'd play along the piano. And we'd have church service. So years later, when I started to wrestle with a call to accept what God wanted me to do with my life, and I finally gave into that call, my grandmother looked at me and said, I knew that was going to happen when you were 3 years old. Really? Yeah. What about all these other times I said, well, I want to do this and I want to do this? I said, I knew God would bring you around to what your true calling was at some point in your life, but I knew you were going to do that at 3 years old, which is one of those things, I tell you, I don't really believe in predestination in the sense the way the Calvinists do it, but we serve a sovereign God. We serve a sovereign God who's able to lay out a plan for us. And if we may throw up roadblocks and obstacles to our own plan, but he doesn't. Before I get to, I will say this much. Proverbs 22:6 says, start a youth out on his way, even when he grows old, he will not depart far from it. And you will see there came points in my life that I started to wander away from the path that God had laid out for me. But I believe that Bible verse to be absolutely true. And I've talked with some of you in here who have trouble with your kids, whether they teenagers, whether they're adults, whether you're a grandparent and you've got kids you're having struggles with who are raising kids of their own. And I stand by this verse. If you raise your child in the way they should go, when they get old, they won't depart far from it. It don't say they won't wander off at times. I'm a living, breathing example of that. But they won't depart far from it. When I was about 8 years old, I can remember it was January. I can't remember the date. I love these people who say, you know, my spiritual birthday is such and such and such. And it's January of 1992. I know that much. But I was 8 years old. Lynn got up at the pulpit midway and he started speaking. And his wife, Rhonda, had sat in on our Sunday school class a week or two before that and had taught the Sunday school class because the teacher was going to be out of town. And she had said something about, you know, if you got to use challenging kids. We had a bad habit of the kids getting up and having to go to the bathroom during the church service. You get through some of the music or the preacher be preaching, you see a little head pop up and go to the bathroom and come back and sit back down. She said, why don't you do me a favor? She says, make sure you go to the bathroom before church service starts. That way you don't get up in it. She said, and pay attention what the preacher has to say. Hand shot up. It was mine. I don't understand what he talks about. Any of y'all kids feel that way about me sometimes? Don't lie. Michaela's got her hand up. Thank you for being honest. Rachel, you want to admit? You always understand. Thank you. I don't understand what he talks about sometimes. That's what she told me. Get you a piece of paper and get you a pencil. And everything he says that you don't understand, I want you to write down. Oh, all right. I take that challenge. Challenge accepted. I got my piece of paper and pencil out and listened one Sunday. And sure enough, by the end of the service, you know what I realized I didn't understand? Nothing. I understood everything he said that Sunday. I said, well, maybe she told him. Maybe Rhonda told Lynn that Joey's going to be listening, so make sure he understands everything you say today. Maybe he dumbed it down a little bit for me. He won't remember it 2 Sundays in a row. 2 Sundays later, he preached out of John chapter 14, verse 6. Jesus is talking to Thomas. And Jesus has said, you know, where I'm going, you'll know the way. And Thomas stands up and says, you know, how are we supposed to know the way if you don't explain it to us? And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. And I don't know what the rest of I can't remember what he preached on before that. I can't tell you. I quit writing. Well, I didn't write anything. I was waiting for I don't understand this point. But I put the paper and pencil down at that point, and I can't remember the rest. I don't even know if I paid attention to the rest of the service. Something about that verse hit me. And I've told people before, my salvation experience, the moment that I accepted Jesus into my heart, I was raised in a household that Jesus was at the center of it for the most part. Like I said, my parents didn't go to church faithfully, but they weren't heathens either. You know, Mama was a Christian, Daddy was a Christian. You know, when I wanted to talk to them about God, they didn't squelch away from it. They'd sit down and talk to me about anything. If they didn't know something, they would say, well, maybe you need to talk to your granny or your papa or somebody like that. If Big Mama didn't know anything, and there was times I'd stump my grandmother. She'd say, well, maybe you need to go talk to the preacher. But they were never shy about answering my questions. So I tell people all the time, my life before accepting Jesus is like a jigsaw puzzle, but not a 1,000-piece one. It was like one of those little kid pieces. You know, it's got 6 pieces. And 5 of them were hooked together. There was just this one thing missing in the middle. And when I heard that, it was like the final piece of the puzzle. And I saw the big picture. And to quote Roger Roller, at 8 years old, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. I didn't know all there was to know about myself. I didn't know all there was to know about Jesus. But I knew that I recognized that I was a sinner. And I was at 8 years old, I was old enough to understand that what that sin meant as far as me and God. That it was going to separate me from God for all of eternity and that I couldn't do anything about it. That my sin, every time I had lied to my parents, every time, I remember at 5 years old, I stole a pack of stickers from the grocery store. I told my mother that when I was a teenager. I didn't get caught. A lot of people get caught. I didn't get caught. I was smooth. But, and I went home and immediately, as soon as nobody was looking, I put them stickers up on my closet door. But every time I looked at those stickers thereafter, something eat me inside. I eventually went and paid for those stickers. About a year and a half after I stole them, I went and told Dexter Amos, I said, I stole a pack of stickers a year and a half ago. And I give him 75 cents. I don't know what they were worth. He don't know what they were worth. He took them and he bought me a pack of gum or something like that. He said, I appreciate your honesty. I was just worried I was getting so much trouble when I told him, but I couldn't live with it anymore. After I'd given my life to Jesus, things like that, just glaring examples of, I need to be a better person. I have honored Jesus by giving him my life. I don't need to dishonor him by continuing to live like a sinner would. At 8 years old, this is going through my mind, these kind of things. On my 9th birthday, March 29th of 1992, I was baptized at Midway Baptist Church. All throughout my life, I've seen Jesus' hand in it. I dealt with death very young. Most kids don't love anybody like they love mommy and daddy. Becca, except maybe Michaela. I think Becca loves Michaela more than she loves us. Most kids don't love anybody like they love mom and daddy. You look and say, you want to come to me, and they'll bury themselves in mama's arms. They'll bury themselves in daddy's arms. For me, it wasn't my mama or my daddy. It was my nana. Like I said, mama worked, daddy worked, big mama worked, papa worked. My Aunt Frances, my nana, took care of me, and my great grandmother, my Edna, they took care of me. And Nana didn't have any kids. She was unable to have children. So when Mama was the closest relative with kids. She lived just across the road, whereas everybody else kind of spread out over the community. So when Mama had a child and had to go back to work, my Nana laid claim to me. This is mine. Everybody else gets somebody else. This one's mine. And I can remember 3 and 4 years old, waking up at about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm hungry. And she'd get out of bed and she'd go in the kitchen. I'd go with her and she'd make me grits. As my wife makes a nasty looking. She'd make me grits, country ham and red eye gravy grits. That's the one I liked. They'd make me oatmeal in the morning. I won't much on oatmeal. I love my grits, but I won't much on oatmeal. And they put it on this plate that had this floral pattern on the bottom. It says I'd have to discover the flowers. So, of course, that wanting to get to the flowers, I'd eat all the oatmeal off the plate in order to get to the flower image on the bottom. She'd make me cream of mushroom soup. To this day, I love cream. I mean, most people cook with it. They use it to cook sauces or something like that. I will take a can of cream of mushroom, and some of y'all can get sickened by this. Sometimes if I'm really hungry, I'll crack that thing open and just start eating straight out of it. Just cold cream of mushroom soup. Campbell's, I'll eat the Progresso kind, but Campbell's, I love it. To this day. That's my Nana. And when I was in first grade, we hadn't been in first grade 2 days. My Nana passed away from Alzheimer's. She had it. It went quick and it had gotten bad. But Mama, to this day, she says, I've never seen anything like it. She wouldn't know who anybody was. She wouldn't know who my big mama was, her niece, practically a daughter who was taking care of her. She didn't know who her sister was, my Edna. She didn't know who anybody was. She'd lay in bed and she'd call for her mama and her daddy who'd been dead for 30, 40 years. But when I got down there, I'd get in bed with her and she'd calm down. She knew who I was. And I can't, other than it was that close of a relationship. And I still get teary-eyed today. And it's been 25, 26 years since she's passed. Well, no, it's longer than that. It's been nearly 30 years since she's passed away. And it still hurts. Uncle Bob was the first, but that was her brother. He died a year before she did. Then she died when I was about 6 years old. My grandmother Giles died on January the 1st of 1997. She was alive when I gave my life to Christ, but by the time I felt God calling me into the ministry, she wasn't there. And I wish she had been there for that. Becca, I know it's hard to look because you're looking at a picture of a 70-year-old woman right there, but I see Becca smile sometimes, and I see my grandmother Giles, and I once again to get a little teary-eyed because I wish my grandmother would have been able to know my daughter. She would have loved her. It's hard. Those kind of trials and tribulations in life. But I learned fairly quickly, Psalm 116:15. The death of his faithful ones is valuable in the Lord's sight. Looking at it from the King James Version, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. We've had our fair share of that since I've been here at Berkeley Baptist. But every last person that's ever made such a huge, huge impact in my life has made it that way because they were always pointing me towards a walk with Christ. My Uncle Bob, my Nana, Granny Giles, Edna passed away on January the 17th of 2008. She was there when I gave my life to Christ. She was there when I surrendered to the call to ministry. She was there when I preached my first sermon. Papa Giles, who never, ever, ever left Piney Grove Baptist Church the whole time I was alive, except on 2 occasions that I remember. He was there the day I was baptized, and he was there the day I preached my first message. When I was ordained at Ebenezer Baptist Church, he made a 30-mile drive with my aunt that night, and he was the last person to lay hands on me. That's something I'm going to put in my heart for the rest of my life, because my granddaddy helped ordain me into the ministry. Life moves on. Let me get the tears out of my eyes. Ain't it pretty? No, this is enough to make a grown man smile. It may make you cry, but it makes me smile. My daddy and I were really close when I was little. When him and my stepmother got married, that relationship was strained for several years. I'm glad to say at this point in our life we're getting close again. I wish I seen him more often. I wish I talked to him more often. That's on me as much as it is on him, but when we do talk, we make the most out of it. Proverbs 3:11-12 says, "Do not despise the Lord's instruction, my son, and do not loathe his discipline. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, just as the father disciplines the son in whom he delights." I hold this, not that this was my form of discipline. I'm a Cowboys fan because of my daddy. So all of y'all want to give me grief. You don't take it up with me, take it up with him. And in all honesty, you need to take it up with my granddaddy Giles, but you have to wait to heaven to do that because that's where he is now. Papa Giles watched one football game a year. Thanksgiving, the Cowboys. And he poured for the Cowboys. Daddy, when he was growing up, Daddy got more involved in it. And actually became a Cowboys fan, and he passed it off to me. And Becca, look at Daddy. He said, "Go Cowboys." I'm raising my child the way she should go, so when she gets older, she won't depart far from it. This is something this is something me and my daddy still have in common. I've never been to a professional football game, and neither has my father. But I think y'all may have to give me a Sunday off in the next year or two. Now that some things have been taken care of, I may have to make a trip to Texas, or if not that, at least to D.C. when they play the Redskins, so me and my daddy can go watch a Cowboys game together. "15 years old." This is a ratty-looking Bible, right? It's a New Testament. It ain't even a full Bible. 15 years old, I felt God starting to call me to the ministry. I'll tell you right now, I did not. My grandmother says she knew that it was going to happen since I was 3. At 15 years old, I felt God starting to call me to the ministry, and I had wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer or anything else other than a preacher. I had no desire to go. But I heard it just as clear as I can hear you talking to me or laughing at some of these corny jokes I say. I've got plenty of people lined up to be doctors. I've got plenty of people lined up to be lawyers. I've got plenty of people lined up for everything else that you can come up with. I need you to take my word to the people. Jeremiah 1, 5 through 6 says, I chose you before I formed you in the womb. I set you apart before you were born. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. But I protested. Oh no, Lord. Oh no, Lord God, not me. Look, I don't know how to speak since I'm only a youth. I make every excuse I could. This Bible, this one right here, I preached my first sermon out of. It wasn't a fancy Bible. It wasn't a leather-bound Bible. It was a simple paperback Bible that's designed to give people, that's got the instructions of how to, the Romans path, right there off page 1. It gives an introduction, where to find it. It even tells you to, at one point it gives you the little starting path. You need to read here, and it tells you to skip to this chapter. Then it tells you to skip to this verse. And when you go to the New Testament and you get to, where's Romans at? There, see, it's even got the little arrows and the voices underlined you need to read. That's not what I preached on, but that's what it was. And I accepted God's call on condition. Lord, I will, finally, I said no. It was at a revival. Roger Roller was speaking at a revival, and I felt God calling me into ministry. I was like, nope, 6 months I denied the Lord. Midway does 2 revivals a year, a spring one and a fall one. 6 months I denied the Lord. Said, nope, not going to do it, not going to happen, no way, no how. My life stunk for 6 months. Me and my best friend quit speaking to each other. My girlfriend and I broke up. My next girlfriend and I broke up. My third girlfriend and I broke up. I couldn't keep a girlfriend to save my life. My grade, I wanted to be a doctor. My grades started to plummet. One thing my daddy said when I told him when I was little that I wanted to be a doctor, you need to start getting good grades now because medical school will look further back than most schools will. They're not going to just look at SAT scores or your final grades your senior year or even your junior year. They're going to look back further. So I got really good grades for a long time. My grades started to sink down. What's going on? I can't do anything right to save my life. And in the back of my head, there's still that voice. It's because I want you to do something and you're telling me no. Spring revival comes around. Rick Vi, who spoke at our revival down here in town last year, he was speaking. And I can't remember what Rick was talking about, but it finally come to this point. It says, all right, Lord, you win. I surrender. Conditionally. So long as everything goes good. I'm surrendering to your call. This is what you want me to do. Therefore, it's going to go good. It's just like that Bible verse that says if we give our lives to Jesus, everything's honky-dory thereafter, right? No, and neither is calling. It don't work that way either, and I've learned that too. So come graduation. I got 2 things up here for graduation. This is the first Bible I ever got with my name inscribed on it. This is one of the reasons everywhere I go, no matter, I don't care if the church has had the tradition or not. When I arrive as the pastor, it's a tradition that gets started. I'm glad y'all already had it. We've already purchased Bibles for our graduates this year. They got the names in them. This is a Thompson Chain Reference King James Version study Bible. I did not purchase those for our graduating youth, but this is what Midway gave me. And I preached out of this. The first sermon I ever preached as an actual pastor, I preached out of that. This little cup right here, my Gretna High School Hawks, 2001, first in the millennia. This is I don't know if it's still there or not, but for years, for 3 or 4 years afterwards, I can't remember who makes this or who the company was. It's the same one that does the rings. Huh? No. No. Jostens. When you looked inside their magazine and they had the cup. Now the back, that wasn't that, but the front logo on the cup in the magazine was ours because they liked it so much. I've never drinking anything out of it. It usually just sits and collects dust. One thing you can say about knowledge, Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. I don't care how smart I've gotten. I was going to bring some other things over here. I was going to bring my high school diploma. I was going to bring my college diploma. I was even going to bring a big old massive master's degree I got hanging off the wall. But None of those are important. What's important is I don't care how smart you are in life. If you reject, Stephen Hawking was a smart man, right? Actually, he was a genius. Stephen Hawking is in hell right now, and I don't care if they watch this on YouTube and this goes viral and people start yelling and fussing at me. Bible said, put the scripture verse back up there. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. Meaning if you deny Jesus, you're not going to make it to the Father. It means you're not going to make it to heaven. Stephen Hawking was a smart man, but he was a fool. Real wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. It was also about high school time. I got into Star Wars. I'm a big Star Wars fan. It's a hobby. You got a hobby? Everybody's got a hobby, right? If you don't, I pity you. Everybody should have a hobby. If you look at me and say, I don't have time for hobbies, make time for hobbies. Proverbs 17:21 says, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. My granddaddy Giles, he had a hobby. He liked to cut his grass. Y'all might not understand that. I don't now. I got a little yard. You know what you cut your grass with a little yard? A push mower and a weed eater. For all the pain that I had at the last church I was at, I had this huge backyard, and they had this great big Husqvarna riding mower. I loved cutting the grass. I didn't cut the grass apparently as much as the chairman of the Building and Grounds Committee wanted me to cut it because he complained about the fact the grass was getting too long. But when I did cut it, I enjoyed cutting the grass. I'd get out there, I'd put my headphones in, I'd crank up the audio slave, and I'd just roll. Most of y'all don't know who audio slave is. That's okay. I didn't cut grass listening to the Gaithers. But I cut grass. I wouldn't call this a hobby, but this was something I was very passionate about. This is mine. I bought it with my own money, a couple of $100s. For 6 years, I was a member of the Gretna Volunteer Fire Department. For 2 years, I was a member of the Triplet Volunteer Fire Department. I'd love to get involved in it again, but I don't think my health would actually let me do that. Surgeries I've had, hernia issues and whatnot. But I was chaplain for the Gretna Volunteer Fire Department. Really profound years of my life. Learned a lot. Community service. When I was at Triplet in 2011, only because I was in the hospital one night, he tied me. Me and the chief were in a race for most calls run for the department. You can tell how rural this department is. I tied for first place with most calls with 21 calls that year. 21. When I was on the Gretna Volunteer Fire Department, I was like 9th down the list with 140 some. 21 calls. I was in the hospital one time and he got one that I didn't, so he tied me. I thought I was going to win it. A lot of people get selfish in life. I always thought giving back to the community was important. Romans 12:1 says, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. It doesn't say you need to give back through public service, but Gretna did so much for me. I am who I am because of where I was raised and the people who were around me when I was raised. Gretna's not a perfect place. Berkeley Springs isn't a Berkeley Springs isn't a perfect place. This place reminds me a lot of my hometown, though. Very much so. Y'all got more stoplights than Gretna does, but that's about it. 1 Corinthians 13:3 says, if I give away all my possessions, if I give over my body in order to boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. I didn't do it to be a hero. I remember we were at a preschool over at West End Church of Christ. Who was the lady that run that? The preacher's wife. Valerie Parker had a little preschool she run out of the house. And we showed up one day to Fire Prevention Week talking to kids. If you ever wake up in the middle of the night and you got smoke or you see flames, this is what you need to do. If you see a guy come in and 100 degrees outside and they'd suit me up in the full suit. And if you ever see one walk in like this and I had the mask and the Nomex on and I had the helmet and the gloves and everything and underneath I was just pouring water out of every pore in my body. What, are you scared of these people? No. And a little girl come up to me after it was over with and said, you're a hero. See, a lot of people do stuff like because that's what they want. They want that acclamation. That was just the most awkward feeling in the world to have somebody say that to me. I didn't do that for this stuff to be recognized. I did that stuff because it was a way of giving back. And I think whether it's public service or something like that, we all need to seek to give back in life. All right. What Dan's been waiting for, risk. I went to Bluefield College and joined a fraternity, Phi Mu Delta Christian fraternity. And the guys there that I met and were my fraternal brothers, some friendships I still have to this day. I don't get to see them as often as I like, but you've heard me mention the name Matt Phillips, but Dave Hobbs lives in Harrisonburg, or just south of Harrisonburg, Virginia. Chris Ake lives in Lynchburg. Mark Heitz lives outside of Richmond. I mean, just names come in and friends and faces. Our fraternity's motto, its verse, was Psalms 133:1, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity. And that's what it was. I mean, I wouldn't have got through college because the college was where I hit the skids. This is the next thing up on the list right here. Now, for those of you who want to know, this is not a bottle of alcohol. This is one of my wife's sparkling lemonades that she gets at Big Lots in Hagerstown. But you know what it looks like? It looks like a champagne bottle. You know what happens? Oh, it ain't got no suds in it. First time I popped the top on it, it sounded like a champagne cork going off. Alcohol played a really big part of my life towards the latter end of my college. But I don't know if the Lord would have ever gotten me back on the right path if it hadn't been for the frat brothers he put in my life, who prayed for me, who worried about me, who in my darkest times ministered to me. How good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity. You know, and if you want to get a little gender neutral on that, it's sisters as well. When you're surrounded by people who love you, whether it's, that's one of the first times you realize it's not just about blood. Love goes beyond blood. Garth Brooks says, you know, got a song that says, blood is thicker than water, but love is thicker than blood. And these guys got me through. And the reason I got the wrist board up, because wrist became a very big thing as far as our fraternity life. Me and Dave, Matt not so much, but me and Dave and Chris and John B. and a couple other. Longest game of Risk I ever played was 76 hours long. That's Friday afternoon through Sunday evening. We would pause and take breaks and order pizza in and drink Mountain Dews and Gatorades and Dr. Peppers and start to smell funky and it was just a powerful time in my life. And that's the good that competed against the evil, because the alcohol and other things started to play a part. When I was at First Baptist Bluefield, was a youth minister. It's the first church I ever went to that wasn't my home church or my granddaddy's church. First church I ever went to that was committed to death. Some of you in here say, well, you want to serve on this committee. Nominating committee. You want to know how you ask the nominating committee. We don't think too much about the committees in this church until the nominating committee is asked to find people to serve in different roles and think we got too many committees in this church. First Baptist Church Bluefield was committed to death. And the committees had way too much power. And the youth committee nearly ruined my call to ministry. And I don't say that saying don't go to that church, because there's good people at First Baptist just like there's good people with other churches that have had issues. But whether it was I was unprepared or whether I was taking my focus off of Christ or whatever, I almost lost my call at that church. So I had surrendered to God conditionally, not unconditionally. I said, all right, Lord, I'll follow this call in my life so long as that road stays smooth. I hit the first bump, and it was a big bump, but it was a bump compared to other things. And it just sent me careening off to one side. Alcohol, girls, y'all know what I mean when I say girls, right? I don't mean just I had this girlfriend and this girlfriend and this girlfriend. I mean immorality, sexual immorality. I just went off. If you had run into me in public and someone says, you know that kid right there is going to school to be a pastor, you'd looked and said, God help the church that calls him into ministry. Because I was off on a tangent. Proverbs 21 says, wine is a mocker, beer is a brawler. Whoever goes astray because of them is not wise. That fear of the Lord that I'd had in high school, the beginning of knowledge, it had gone. And I was substituting it for substance. Never got into drugs, praise the Lord. But alcohol, pornography, lust. And sometimes some of y'all sat in on some of the seminars yesterday. Sometimes, because it affects the dopamine in your brain, sometimes those things can be just as addictive as drugs. I'm convinced that one of the biggest addictions going on nowadays is social media and technology. You see, heard a kid lost his cool, started breaking mama's vases in the house when she took his cell phone away. There's only one, I mean, that's not just a good butt whipping. There's something that's been thrown off in the kid's head by the constant use of the technology. It is a drug. It affects the dopamine. For me, it was alcohol. For me, it was women. 1 Peter 4:3 says, for there has always been enough time spent in doing what the Gentiles choose to do, carrying on in unrestrained behavior, evil desires, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and lawless idolatry. I had traded in. I hadn't denied Jesus. I wasn't that stupid. I knew who Jesus was. I knew who God was, and it was one of those, He'll forgive me. But I was lost in darkness. Sin had taken I believe when Paul says nothing can separate us from the love of God, I believe that to be true. And it hadn't separated me from God's love, but it had blinded me to the light of Christ. I couldn't see the cross anymore because I had gone off on such a harsh turn. I was in darkness. Ephesians 5:18 says, don't get drunk with wine, which leads to reckless living, but be filled with the Spirit. I was drunk. I was in the dark. And if it wasn't for my frat brothers, I don't know if I'd ever come back from it. Came time, my senior year, I'd done given up at this call to the ministry at this point. It was too late. I didn't do the smart thing. I went to college, and the first thing I did was start grabbing all my Christian studies courses and not doing the general ed. And I'm glad I did it that way, because if I'd done it the other way, I may have actually completely given up on this call. But I'd done all my Christian education or Christian studies courses the first 2 years. My last 2 years, I was doing all the general ed stuff when I was going off on the tangent. So the idea was, I must have misunderstood this call. It's too late to change my degree. I'll be in college for 6 years instead of 4. I'll be so much more money in debt. Daddy works for Frito-Lay in Lynchburg, Virginia. You can be in management at Frito-Lay just as long as you have a college degree. It doesn't matter what it's in. It doesn't have to be in business or administration or anything like that. So long as you have a college degree, you can break into management. I'll get Daddy to get me a job. So that was the new plan. I'm going to graduate from college. I'm going to go back to Lynchburg. I'm going to beg and plead my daddy to get. I don't care if it's working in a warehouse. Frito-Lay pays good money. I'll start off at Frito-Lay and I'll work my way up. Maybe I'll get on over at BWX, and work my way up because I got a college degree. Don't matter what it's in. Some of those companies are like that. So long as you got a degree, you can get into management. Well, about 3 months before I graduated, a couple of my frat brothers were going to a new church plant. And one of them said, hey, you're coming with me to church tomorrow morning. No, I'm not. Yeah, you are. Listen, I'm not. So just drop it. I left and I went home, went to bed. 7:30 the next morning, my telephone rings. Who is calling me? There's a rule I had in college. Unless you were my grandmother or my mother, you didn't call me before 8 a.m. I don't care if the building was on fire. You didn't call me before 8 a.m. Who's calling me? I pick up. Hello! It's one of my frat brothers. Hey, we're going to be going to church here in about 25 minutes. Be ready. I'm coming to get you. Stop joking around, man. This ain't funny. I'm not going to church. Click. 10 minutes later, the phone rings again. Hey, I'm getting ready to walk out my apartment door. I'm going to be over at your apartment here in just a few minutes. Be ready to go to church. I'm not going to church, dude. Listen, I'm bigger than you are, Joey. You're going to church today if I have to drag you kicking and screaming. Click. I was inebriated. I can't see straight. I ain't going to win no fight. So I get out of bed and brush my teeth and splash some water on my face, and I go into my room, and I've got like 4 piles of dirty clothes. You've got the slight, only been worn once, the ones they're still okay, the ones that are a little on the right side, and the ones that you need to pick up with the tongs and put them into the biohazard bags. And in one of the first 3 piles was a pair of khakis and a dress shirt, so I got it on, I throw it on, and threw on some socks and shoes. And by the time I was opening up the door started knocking, and I go to church. And they were having communion that Sunday. It was meeting in a hotel conference room. That's where this church was meeting at, because they didn't have a building. It had been off of a split. The positive element of the split had gone off to, and that's where it was meeting at the hotel. But communion was on the table. And I know some of you look and say, it was just a trick of the light. I don't care what it was. God spoke to me. And the light shone in from outside. It was like a direct beam onto the communion table. And I heard that voice in the back of my head again. What are you doing? And that's where I started to hear God speaking to me again. A week or 2 later, had a party. Really got a little too much to drink. Buddy of mine and I were kind of competing for the same girl, and he won, and I was ticked. So I started drinking some more, and I stumbled off, and it's a wonder I didn't get arrested for drunk in public. I stumbled down the street, and there's this old church. I'm not even sure if a congregation met there anymore. I don't ever remember the whole time I was in Bluefield seeing a single car at this church. Grass was always growing up around it, a disarray. I stumbled and I sat across the street from it, staring at it, and burning bush experience. I don't know if it was me just imagining or whatever, or if God actually spoke to me, but God spoke to me. And I heard an audible voice saying how disappointed he was in me. I have called you for a purpose. I have called you for something greater. I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. And this ain't it. You got to get your act together. Because if you don't, you remember how those 6 months were after you denied the calling? Get ready, because you're going to be in for a life of disappointment. And it was something in that shook me out of that drunken stupor. I mean, I kid you not. Probably close to alcohol poisoning that night. And sober like that. Might as well have just hooked my blood up to a dialysis machine and just poured every last bit. It was gone. I was clear-minded. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't just alcohol was out of my system. The devil's voice was out of my system, because the devil can't be in the presence of God. He flees from the presence of God. And I didn't have any doubt. There was any denial. There was none of that was there. All it was me and God. And I heard him clearly for the first time in a long time. Get up and start doing right. I went home and I went into the cabinet, and I kid you not, I had in the cabinet above the sink, above the tea glasses, was a jug that had XX on it. You ever Marvin, Andy Griffith, Father Darling blowing on the... I had one of those. Only difference was it won't empty. It won't use... It had old corn mesh moonshine in it. And it made that sink spotless. And I reached in the refrigerator and I poured out a bottle of Jim Beam that was like this. And it made the toilet spotless. And I reached in the refrigerator and I poured out my roommate's alcohol. And he didn't appreciate it at first, but he was a frat brother too. And I said, you know what? Clean living. And his response, that's one reason I know God was, all right, brother, amen, let's do it. 3 months later, I graduated from Bluefield College. A month after that, I started as interim pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church for 2 years. The high water mark as far as a church I was considered until I got to Berkeley Baptist Church. God worked amazing things through those next few years. At Ebenezer, I got my Bible verse right here from my Ebenezer point. 1 Timothy 3:1. This saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to be an overseer, that's another Greek word for pastor or overseer or bishop. If anybody desires to be an overseer, he desires a noble work. God didn't lead me down a wrong path. I allowed the devil to take me off the path. And now that I was back on the path, I could see God using me to do his work. I get up in front of people and speak at something besides a pulpit, I get tongue-tied. I remember her grandparents were there. Gretna was trying to get a hospital put in because the nearest emergency room was 30-some miles away. It was trying to fight to get a hospital put in, and we were going to need a MRI machine, I believe was what it was they were fighting for. And there was a doctor's office in Chatham that was trying to get an MRI machine too. The only difference was if Central Health won, they were going to get to have a hospital that was going to be 24/7. If Danville Regional won, they were going to have a doctor's office that was going to have extended hours to 7 p.m. What about the person who has a massive stroke at 8? So I got up and spoke in front of a room full of 5,000 people. I got up and spoke and I was tongue-tied and nervous. But when I get up to present the Word of God, I don't say I still don't get butterflies, but as soon as I start, the nerves go away. I'm up here pouring out my life story. There's a risk when you tell people you was a drunk womanizer heathen in college and you're their pastor now. There's a risk that goes like, Lord, what did we do when we hired this guy? We need to get the pastor search committee together. Well, Marvin, you need to get back to the task. You're a little worried now. Let me tell you something. God doesn't bring us to something that he won't see us through. God didn't bring me to alcohol. He brought me to college to learn. The devil got in my way. But just as the devil got in my way because I let him, he got out of the way because God made him. I was at Ebenezer for 2 years before they hired their full-time pastor. Went to this little church up off the side of the mountain for a year and a half called Round Pond. Was part-time. I was their pastor, but it was part-time. I'm making $100 a week. Was glad to be of service to God. Was a great place to be while I pursued my education. But shortly had my resume out with the Liberty Church Placement Office. For long, this little church, and this is James Square Baptist Church in Lawrenceville, Virginia, called me, and I was there for a little over 3 years as their pastor. Wasn't always easy. First time I really experienced, since First Baptist Bluefield as a youth minister, first time I experienced those bumps in the road again, but this time I had given my life over unconditionally to God's ministry. James 1:2-4 says, "Consider it a great joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you experience various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking for nothing." Within a year and a half, I was ready to resign again. Not quit ministry, just get out of that church. And you know what? Looking back after having gone through the last church we had, things weren't that bad. The big deal was I was down there by myself. I didn't have a wife. I didn't have family close by. I had people I was close with in church, but they were church people. I didn't have any support when I got home. If Tiffany and I had been married at that point, I probably would have stayed on at James Square for a lot longer. I was going through some trials, though, but every time I felt, every time I heard the devil whispering, you just need to quit it again. I'm going to stick to it because this is what God has called me to do. Then I heard God tell me it's time to leave. All right, Lord, you line up something to go. So I started interviewing with this church in West Virginia, up in the Eastern Panhandle. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? I started interviewing with them, and during the interview process, I heard the Lord tell me, all right, enough's enough. You've got to leave James Square. I've got something else lined up for you. You need to put your faith and trust in me. Okay, Lord, you spoke. I'll follow. And I gave my resignation. Not having secured another church, moved back to Gretna, moved into my mother's house at 25, 26, something like that. Moved back into Mama's house. I'm sure she was thrilled. And then lo and behold, this church in West Virginia doesn't call me. They call some guy named Everett. And that's not the first time I'd ever had somebody, getting down to being the last of one of the two and didn't get the call. But it was something about that church. I just knew the Lord was going to call me there. Things felt, I met strangers that seemed like family. What's going on, Lord? Trust me. That's all I heard was trust me. So before I had moved to James Square, I had gotten involved in a local community theater in Gretna that just started up. It was in 2 plays, Merry Widow and Curse You, Jack Dalton. I played the villain. That was fun. When a pastor gets to play the villain, oh, that's fun. If they ever cast me in a movie role, I want to be Darth Vader's grandson. Great-grandson. He's already got a grandson now. I want to be his great-grandson. I want to be the bad guy in the movie because that's make-believe. It's not who I am in real life. Well, I got back and I got involved. One of my friends, Shelley Bayless, was a director of a play, and she said, I could really use some help. I'm like, I'll do anything you want to except act. If you want me to be a stage manager, you want me to help put set together, I'll do anything you want. Just don't ask me to act because it'll take up too much time. Within a week, I was cast as a supporting male role. Thank you, Shelley, for listening to me. I appreciate that. Got involved in that, ended up being the assistant director for the Summer Youth Project. And then came the summer musical. Becca, come here. Well, let Mama help me. This is it's not heavy, but I'm going to ask Tiffany to prop it up here while I talk. She can prop it up. This was painted by her maid of honor over a weekend. She come in from school and took a picture of the theater and she went back. The summer musical was Bye Bye Birdie. Have any of you ever seen Bye Bye Birdie? The movie or any of the music? Any of you? Okay, a couple of you. This was not that. See, the musicals are good. The movie's good. This stunk. A young man was cast in the lead role of Conrad Birdie, couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. Would have made, I hear music teachers all the time. Betty probably, we can work with you. You couldn't have worked with him. It sounded like they was killing the dog when he was trying to sing. I'm not joking. It sounded like a wounded mule trying to sing. The only reason he got the role was because I believe that he was one of the director's favorites and she felt she owed him a lead role. It was horrible. There was one silver lining out of the whole thing. I was having dinner at the New Mexican restaurant in Gretna with the music director, my music teacher from school. And lo and behold, one of her former voice students walked in with her mama. This redhead. I love a redhead. It's not just because I've just always loved redheads. She comes in and Brenda pops up and runs off to her, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know who she's talking to, but I hope she listens because I knew what she was going to talk to her about. I love a redhead. I knew what she was going to talk to her about, though. She was going to talk to her about auditioning. I'm like, I don't know who she is. I hope she auditions. And sure enough, audition night, she walks in and she sits down next to Corbin Bond. I haven't ever said a word to this woman yet, and the jealousy inside of me, I know who Corbin is. I've known Corbin for a long time. She's probably known him longer. That's her buddy. But I've known Corbin for a long time. I could have beat his face into the ground that night. This is coming from a preacher. I don't know what got a hold of me. Come here. I could have beat his face into the ground there. Here, I want to read a Bible verse to you. Song of Solomon 8:6-7 says, set me as a seal on your heart, as a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death. Jealousy is unrelenting as Sheol. You know what Sheol is? Some Bible versions translate that as hell. Jealousy as unrelenting as hell. Love's flames are fiery flames, an almighty flame. A huge torrent cannot extinguish love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If a man were to give all his wealth for love, it would be utterly scorned. Talking about love. You mean you gave only money for me? I do believe in love at first sight, but not concerning us. I thought she was a hot-looking thing. I didn't know who she was. She could have opened up her mouth.
He can't see.
Stop interrupting my sermon. Go with your mama. Go with your mama. Go back to mama. She could have opened up her mouth and been a Democrat, and that would have ruined it. She could have opened up her mouth and, I don't know, she could have been something, it could have come out and I'm like, there goes that. I met a lot of redheads in my life. I've dated a lot of redheads in my life. I've met a lot of good-looking redheads. And as soon as they start talking, I dated one in college. God forgive me, I hope she don't see this video. I was drinking at the time. And when she talked, it come out as dumb as mud. And if I had been in my right senses, the second that I was dating her and she opened up her mouth, I would have said, okay, that's enough. I'm done. But I got to talking to Tiffany, and I'm like, wow, she's insightful. And I don't know why, but before long, she was talking to me. I found out she had a boyfriend. And I don't use quotes to say, that she had a boyfriend. It wasn't, she liked him. I think he liked her, but something won't click in there. He had other priorities in life, and it wasn't her. And so when she started talking to me, she was still seeing this guy, and I was like, you know what? You just need to drop him. You need to lose him. He don't appreciate you, blah, blah, blah. She wouldn't listen. Jeff Bayless looks at me and says, you just need to quit pursuing after her. She's hung up on this boy. You just need to start focusing your mind on something else. I was ready to listen to him. And lo and behold, she drops the other guy like a hot potato. Show's over with. I take her out to eat for her birthday. A day or two later, we actually start dating. The first place I took her on a date, an actual date, was church. I was filling in for a church one Sunday, and I took her to church with me. And I knew she was a keeper when she was actually excited to go. Make sure I get I'll come back to that one in a second. I'm out of order. Yeah. Her daddy, we started getting serious. And I knew she was the one I was going to marry. But her daddy made it clear that until I could provide for his daughter, he won't be saying yes to anything. When I finally could provide for his daughter, he wasn't too keen on saying yes in that place either, but that's just because that's his baby girl. That's his only child. Might have been different if she had a sibling, but that's not only just the baby, that's the only child. Jeremiah 29:11-13 says, I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. This is the Lord's declaration. Plans for your well-being, not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. You will call to me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. And that applies for two purposes. Looking back, I honestly don't think I was called to Eureka Baptist Church. The devil had gotten in my ear again. He saw me using her and using our relationship. He saw a means to try to get me out of ministry again. Her daddy had said, you've got to be able to provide for her. Eureka got in touch with me. Says, we're looking for a preacher. I saw a way to get married. I honestly don't think I was called to that church. And the heartache that ensued thereafter for me is proof of the fact that I wasn't actually called to that church. But I wanted to get married, and married I got. And we're happily married, but our marriage went through turmoil that first year because of being at the location we were at. We've got good friends down there, but I've never been tested or tried. And I shared that with a group of pastors yesterday at that men's conference, and the leader of that group, because his daddy almost got burned out. He was a preacher's kid. His daddy almost got burned out. He said, what kept you in the ministry? I said, because God called me to this. And I almost gave that up once, and I won't let it. Even in spite of everything that was happening, even the devil himself working against me, I'm not giving it up. God will get me out of it. Lynn Keenan called me in May right before I got married and said, our pastor just resigned. Are you still interested in Berkeley Baptist Church? You've heard this story. Yeah, but I got to talk to my future wife. And I told her, I said, I got a church in West Virginia. Put your resume in. I didn't even get to finish the statement. How far in West Virginia? About 4. Put your resume in. That's how bad things were at the last place we were at. So she gave me Marvin's contact information, and he drug his feet. Lord, did they drag their feet. I had to endure another 6 months of the devil beating me down. But before long, y'all called. And God's been in it ever since. Our wedding day, Proverbs 18:22 says, a man who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. You've been a blessing to me. I know you laugh because I know between your anxiety and other things, sometimes you think you're nothing but a burden, but you're not. And I can't imagine my life without you. And then her. That's a surprise of a lifetime right there. Congratulations, you're going to have a child. Congratulations, you're 7.5 months pregnant. What? James 1:17 says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Proverbs 20, verse 6 and 7 says, many a person proclaims his own loyalty, but who can find a trustworthy person? A righteous person acts with integrity. His children who come after him will be happy. I like to think I've got a happy daughter. Becca, smile for Daddy? Yeah. Y'all can't see it. She's got a big grin going from ear to ear. Psalms 127, 3 through 5. This is the only time you'll ever hear me quote, not from the Christian Sunday. This is from the ESV. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. I wish this was the point I could tell you we were expecting again, but y'all need to talk to her. I'm ready. She's not, so y'all talk to her. One more prop two more props. I know I've gone way past my normal time, and I promise I won't do this next week, but a testimony is a testimony, so you can't rush it. This is my great-grandmother's Bible, not Edna, the one I never met, but it was given to me. It was my Papa Giles' mama, which has put it in a passion. I want to start collecting all the family Bibles over time. Do not bow in worship to them, and do not serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the father's iniquity to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. My family's not perfect, but like I've said, and maybe even before my story starts, in the family story, Christ is woven in it as far back as I've ever searched. 1,000 generations, that's a lot. But I can feel God's, even in the hard times. Why has God been so faithful to me? Why has God favored me? Is it because I gave my life to Him? Yeah, that's part of it. But it's also because my parents gave their life to Him. And my grandparents gave their life to Him. And my great-grandparents gave their life to Him. And my great-great-grandparents gave my life to Him. And as far back as I've ever heard, are there people in my family who are not Christian? Absolutely. But as far as my story, I see God's blessing all the time, even in the midst of the sadness, even in the midst of the darkness. One last Bible verse, one last prop I want to share with you. I want everybody to stand up real quick. Look at your neighbor. Look at your other neighbor. Look at your husbands, look at your wives, look at your kids, your grandkids, look at your grandparents. Look around the church. Because the last prop I want to use in the story of my life is you. Every last one of you. From those who have been here just about every service I've preached since I started in May 1st of 2015 to today, the gentleman in the back that I just met this morning, every last one of you are part of my story. My testimony, my life. Ephesians 3, 8 through 10 says, this grace was given to me, the least of all the saints, to proclaim to the Gentiles the incalculable riches of Christ, and to shed light for all about the administration of the mystery hidden for ages in God who created all things. This is so that God's multifaceted wisdom may now be made known through the church to the rulers and authorities in heaven. God has brought me to you to be your pastor. He's given me you as my congregation. And you are a blessing to me and a part of my testimony. The day may come that I hear God's voice again saying, pack up your stuff and go. And I'm going to tell you, as much as I love y'all, on that day, you will get my resignation and I will go. Because as the song says, it's based off Scripture, wherever He leads, I go. And that's the way it is. But if that day comes, and I don't see it coming anytime soon, but if that day does come, I promise you this, you go with me. Even if you don't go physically, you go with me as part of my story to the Lord. Tom looked at me the other day and said, we need to start sharing testimonies around this church. He didn't even know I was planning on giving my testimony today. And I want to make sure we give an opportunity every now and then to share your testimony. Because each and every one of you here today has a story to tell. And Lord willing, most of you in here today are believers and you've got a story to tell and how you've seen God moving in and out through your life. But if you're here today and you don't have that element of the story, there's no reason you can't begin now. You have seen how God has moved in and out through my life. Hold on one second. You have seen how God has moved in and out of my life. From before I was ever a thought in my mother's womb, for the faithfulness of the generations prior to even now. The same can be said with you. I know it's all, Lord of mercy, it's 12:40. I promise I won't do this to you next Sunday. If you're here today and you've never given your heart to Jesus, now is your chance to respond. And I want you to look around one more time. Because these ain't just people you go to church to. These can be your brothers and sisters in Christ. And every hardship I've dealt with since I've been here, I've got a group of men and I've got a group of women who pray for me, who lift me up, who let me cry on their shoulders, who have held me up in times of heartache. And you can have that too. It's not because I'm their pastor. It's because I'm their brother in Christ. And you can have that too if you'll just surrender your life to Jesus today. Would you join me in prayer? Father, I am unashamed of the testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ because it is my salvation. And I'm unashamed of the testimony. I'm not just talking Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. I'm not just talking Paul's words. I'm talking my own testimony, the own gospel I share. I wasn't there when you walked this earth. I wasn't there when you walked on water, when you fed 5,000 with bread and fish, just a few loaves of bread and a few pieces of fish. But I was there the day that you called me out of my sin. And I was there the day that you called me out of a spiritually dark place. I was there when you took me through the valley of the shadow of death, and I am here on the mountaintop in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, and feel your presence amongst us as we call out in one voice praises to the Lord. And Father, I know that as I walk from this place in my life, you will be with me every step of the way. And I pray today that you will whispering in the ear of the unbeliever that is here. That can be you too. If somebody's here today and they've never given their faith and their heart to Jesus, if they've never put their trust in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior of their life, I pray today that they would surrender, that they would quit fighting. And Lord, from personal experience, I pray that they'll just surrender unconditionally. Father, may your Spirit move. And may it speak to us in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.